Hello, everybody. Today, our guest is Dr. Suzie Shooter from Newport Beach, California. She has specialized in anti-aging medicine for most of her career. She's also a psychiatrist. She was voted as most compassionate doctor in Newport Beach and Orange County, and she's also been featured as Orange Coast Magazine's top doctor, and she's been an assistant professor of psychiatry at Pomona's College of Osteopathic Medicine. And she also is at Hoag Memorial Hospital as well in Orange County. She is a founding member and vice president of the World Society of Anti-Aging Medicine. And she's a founding member of the International Hormone Society as well. She's also delivered over 50 lectures in the last 5 years, and been a member of the American Academy of Anti-Aging Medicine as well since 1998. So, as well as being a member of the International Society of Psychoneuroendocrinology. Well, that's quite a background, Dr. Shooter. And I'm excited to talk to you about how this all relates to the perinatal period of life.
Well, everything affects everything, right? And if you're going to be affected as an adult, you'll be affected as a child, you're going to be affected, the baby will be affected in utero for sure.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really about good medicine. Anti-aging is, I guess it's a funny term, really, because, I'm not against aging. The opposite of aging would be death, right?
Mm.
So it's okay to be alive and even be older, but it's about aging well and being healthy. And so the perinatal period is also important. It's important to be healthy during that time especially, because now you have to have, you don't want to have a child that's going to be challenged in terrible ways. You want them to be the best that they could be, right?
Mm-hmm. Okay, now we're going to talk to Dr. Shooter about the importance of the thyroid gland during pregnancy and the whole perinatal period. Now, we know that, for instance, that there's bromides and fluorides in a lot of the foods we eat today, and that these can disrupt or interfere with thyroid function, in particular iodine. Now, Dr. Shooter, what do you think about this whole area, the thyroid function, iodine, bromides, fluorides, and how these work together, and why is that so important during pregnancy?
Well, first of all, bromide and fluoride should not be anywhere near not only women in the perinatal period, but no one.
Mm.
Because they're toxins.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't belong in the body.
Mm.
And I think dentists were sold a bill of goods about fluoride.
Mm.
And I think, I don't know if you know, but dentists have the highest suicide rate of professionals. Possibly, I was wondering why.
Is that because of mercury as well?
I think so. I really think so. I think that's it. Because I had been engaged to a dentist, and he said they used to mix the dental amalgam in their hand there.
Wow.
That's mercury. Right? It wasn't silver, it was mercury.
Yeah.
It was. And then when you're drilling things out, you're breathing it in, right? So not only the perinatal period, no one should have that. Because it's, you should have mercury, they shouldn't have bromide or fluoride. Bromide is found in baked goods. In the late 60s, early 70s, there was a paper, someone did a research project. And what they did was they gave people a bunch of iodine. These are normal people. And what happened was that their TSH went down. And they said, oh, it's bad for your thyroid. Because they had the misconception that if TSH goes up or down, right, it means that it has something to do with it, for sure it has something to do with your thyroid. Well, they made a bad, conclusion from that. They weren't, it was an erroneous conclusion. But the entire bread making industry in the United States switched over from using iodine to cure the dough to using bromide.
Interesting. So we know that gluten's really, inflammatory for a lot of people, most people in their gut. It doesn't really help the gut inflammatory relationship to brain encephaly and brain inflammation for children with autism. And we know that so many children have this problem today. And so then you're saying on top of this, there's this whole bromide factor as well.
Right. I'm wondering, because I remember, you think about farmers and you think about, America when, not quite going back to prairie days, but They would have bread, on the farm. They would eat bread. It wasn't as much of an issue for them.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if they had as much of it and as much prepared foods, but it was part of their meal, and they weren't having big problems, I don't think. I don't know about back then.
No, you're originally from Hungary.
Yes, I am. Right.
The beautiful city, the city of love and romance, Budapest, right?
Buda, actually, yeah. Right.
Well, and so over there, I mean, living in Eastern Europe, I'm sure your parents probably told you about this. Like, bread was very different. Wasn't it different? Was it made differently than we make it here?
I was 2 when I came, so I don't really remember much.
Yeah.
I have a good memory, but maybe not that good, right?
I mean, bread in their culture.
It was a staple.
It's a,
right?
it's a staple. It seemed very different, though. I didn't have the same reaction that I do
Even in
here.
this country, though.
Yeah.
Now you're thinking of this country, maybe back a number of years ago,
Yeah.
it didn't have the terrible effects it seems to have now.
Mm-hmm.
So, yes, gluten may be a problem for certain people, maybe not everyone, but bromide is probably toxic for everyone.
Mm.
I had a patient, and we used to have something called bromo seltzer, you remember. They took it off the market because it was making people psychotic.
Interesting.
And so, so bromide is not good for us. Right? And fluoride is also bad for us.
Wow.
And I'll tell you why. There's a reason for that. If you, I don't know, if you're people, like if you know about of course, the periodic table.
Right.
There's a halogen column.
Right.
So it starts out with fluoride, then bromide, and then chloride, and then iodine. So the further down you go, the less tightly it binds.
Interesting.
So the fluoride's going to bind more preferentially, and bromide will too, to the like I say receptors, but it's actually the hormone itself. So when you hear about T4, it stands for 4 iodides. So it's like 1, 2, 3, 4, right?
Okay.
And then T3 is the activated form. Why? Because there's a deiodinase that comes along, it snips off an iodine and activates it.
Well, and you have a great solution for that. You prescribe iodine for your patients, and it's such a natural solution to thyroid dysfunction.
It's over the counter, actually.
It's over the counter, right? But there are some detoxification reactions,
Yes,
people.
right.
So can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, if people have a lot of bromide or fluoride in their system, and when I do testing, I see that. I go, oh, wow, their bromide's too high or their fluoride's too high.
Right.
It's sometimes one or the other, and occasionally both, but usually one or the other. And then I tell them, like, if I'm going to give you iodine, and if their iodine levels are really low, or even if they seem elevated, it's not really, it's a false elevation. It's not like they're doing well. It's if they have a lot of bromide and fluoride, the bromide and fluoride make it look higher because those are going to bind preferentially. So it's a loading dose test. So you take iodine, and then whatever you kick back, you don't need. But the idea is that you don't need it because you have enough iodine. But you may not be needing it because you have those receptor things, the sites taken by fluoride and bromide.
So, like, if someone's taking iodine and they're detoxing, that might make them want to. It's going to make them feel bad. So, do you condition their listening by saying, "Look, you tell them ahead of time."
If you don't feel well, that may be why.
Right. Yeah. So they can expect that and not want to be afraid of it. Right?
I also don't want to, have them think about it and then have it happen because they're thinking about it too. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
So I just, well, it could happen. It doesn't happen to everyone, which it doesn't, right?
You're right. But this is such an important, gland during the development of the embryo and the fetal brain development. Can you talk a little bit about the thyroid's function during the baby's brain development?
Well, it's going to help you make neurons and the connections. But rather than look at that, I'm going to tell you about a study because I like to look at the toxins, right? So I'll tell you about the study that was it was done with well water. It's funny because it seems like it should make you well, but not necessarily.
Right.
So they had communities. It was 2 different communities that were dependent on well water. I probably shouldn't do that. But one community.
Right.
I'm from New York, so I talk with my hands. Right. But one community had well water from one well, and the other community had another well. And the one community they added fluoride to their water, and the other community they didn't. And they found that the kids, the offspring, someone did a study. And found that the ones that had the fluoride in their water had about 10 to 20 point less on their IQ test.
Well, that's significant.
It's very significant.
Wow.
Right? So it made them not as bright, and that's because of the lack of.
But they had hard
thyroid.
teeth, right? At least.
I'm sure, but they didn't have adequate thyroid function. Right?
Interesting. Yeah.
Right. So and it's not about the level. We were taught treat the patient, not the labs.
Right.
and people treat the labs, which makes me crazy. But
Well, isn't like of course it's in a different form, in a gaseous form, but isn't fluorine gas what they make sarin gas? So it's like a nerve gas
it's
from?
not a good thing, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know whether it's true or not, but I was reading a book called like the Fluoride Deception or something, and they said something. The way I see things sometimes semi-humorously, but fluoride in our contaminating our environment came out of the when we were making bombs, atom bombs, right? And so it was a byproduct, is what I hear. I'm not gonna
Is it a
guarantee that.
neurotoxin or is that just a myth?
Well, I don't know that. I don't
Some
know
people
that. Maybe
have
at
said
high
that.
doses, could be.
Maybe the dosage. Yeah.
If you well, anyway, it got into our water, and so in our land and everything, and so I imagine the government person said, let's tell them it's good for them, right? So because it became part of our environment. Right?
Yeah, it was a waste product from
yes, that's
chemicals
right,
from
right, when they were making the atom bomb. Right?
Interesting. Yeah, after World War II, a lot of these waste products from, the making of munitions like nitrogen, and phosphorus, now were just dumped into our soil and over acidified our soil. And that's one whole nother aspect of perinatal medicine, how genetics begins in the soil, how we started ruining our soil and so forth. Now, let's talk a little bit about, how traditional medicine, what do they, you were saying that they had a name for children that had like a,
Imbecile.
they called it the children with the mother and the child had the thyroid insufficiency.
If the child was born severely hypothyroid, and that would mean like the mother also, because the child takes things from the mother as well. But the child had to have really hardly any thyroid function.
Right.
They'd be born with severe retardation, and they're very short stature. They have a different look. They have this what we call facies. They have a certain particular look. Different types of retardation have different looks.
Right. So this was a classical serious condition. It wasn't anything. Now today we look at it like, well, my thyroid's not working so well. I can still get pregnant. Is that wise advice? I mean, or should someone know where their thyroid function is?
Well, it's a matter of degree, right? And so if your thyroid function is so bad, there are signs too. First of all, you would have a huge goiter, right? If you have hardly any thyroid function, right? Or hardly any iodine, because your thyroid's going to expand to try and grow itself so it can create more thyroid for you. So there would be some signs that you have something. So I have a feeling that if someone's walking around with this huge goiter, they may not be thinking of getting pregnant. I would hope anyway.
Right. Now, what do you think? I mean, we had a discussion about this before. It was a really interesting conversation in Newport Beach about, like, okay, a lot of the way we treat it is through directly giving, like, say, a thyroid porcine extract, right?
No, actually they give Synthroid usually.
Synthroid.
That's the typical thing. That's what endocrinologists give. For some reason they have something against, the porcine one. Porcine is better, I think. It's certainly better than than something that's not because it's synthetic. It's because it's only one component, and people may not always be able to convert T4 to T3 to the activated form.
Okay.
So then what do? I mean, you may have plenty of T4, but who cares? You're not using it, right?
Well, the thyroid function we know is controlled and directed by the brain matrix, the pineal, hypothalamus, pituitary function, right?
The hypothalamus, pituitary, right? And we do.
And you kind of started that in that area, the brain function, in a lot of ways in your practice.
Absolutely.
And so this whole area of like growth hormone function directs a lot of the thyroid function. Yet that's more of a direct way of controlling it.
They work synergistically.
They work synergistically, and there's a feedback loop from the liver to the brain too, right?
Everything communicates in the body, right?
Yeah.
There's a definite, there is the IGF-1, and there's a feedback loop about growth hormone, right? There's a negative feedback loop. But there's also, the negative feedback loop for TSH. Unfortunately, I think people take, the medical community has taken that to the point of silliness, really, where everything is about the TSH. So if your TSH is at a certain level, you'll get treated.
Right. So that's like a real thyroid condition.
Yeah.
But leading up to that point, like a lot of parents and people, coaches and doctors want to understand, like, how do I determine if I have like a slight thyroid deficiency? Is the only way a blood test, or are there other ways of determining that?
The other ways are better. The blood tests are really not that good. The reason for that is because we are dynamic beings. We're not static. And what you're getting is a frame of a movie, and you're trying to determine the entire movie out of one frame.
Great analogy, yeah.
Right.
Because the blood's so dynamic, right?
We are not. We know everything is being made and used at the same time, so we're constantly altering and changing.
Well, a great example is growth hormone. I mean, it's constantly fluctuating so much you'd have to test it every 5 minutes, right, to be accurate.
Well, yeah,
so we're using something like IGF-1.
It's pulsatile release of growth hormone.
Right. So we use like IGF-1 determined through the liver function, which is really a liver hormone.
Well, yeah,
but it's kind of like a reflection of growth hormone, but it's not really a true.
Well, actually, they think that the IGF-1 is like the more important hormone in the body, whereas growth hormone acts more in the brain.
Right.
Right. So maybe the growth hormone's function is to increase IGF-1. IGF-1 is an amazing hormone.
Yeah,
it's useful. Right?
Yeah. Although
we don't really use it much, except for kids that have severe growth insufficiencies, right?
Right.
So,
well, that's fascinating, and then we're also talking about how you can naturally, stimulate your own growth hormone function, and you're really great at talking about that. I mean, you have a lot of fun with this. Yeah.
I like natural things, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes, when you get older, you may not be able to stimulate it, although maybe some people can, but when you're in the perinatal period, you're not that old usually, right?
Right.
So there are things that interfere with growth hormone production. Lack of sleep. Go to bed too late. You don't sleep enough.
Which is a big problem these days.
It's huge.
With lights everywhere.
Right. Well, why the lights are a problem? Yeah. Because we make melatonin at night. However, the receptors withdraw. They retract. So you may be having melatonin, but they have nowhere to land. Right?
I see. Right.
Because the melatonin receptors pull back in light. Right? And so people will sleep with their phones, and they have light, and I tell them
the internet,
everything, the computers, and really it's better to just power down and then
kind of get ready for bedtime.
Yeah.
Lower the lights a little bit.
Dark.
Yeah. That's a good way to kind of get your body in the mood.
Yeah, it's important.
It's very important. The deeper rest you have, the better off. You're probably. Is that growth hormone spike between 11 and 1? Is that 2 or nothing?
There's different times. First of all, sleep cycle's about 90 minutes, right? And non-REM sleep in stage 4 and late 3 is when you have most of the growth hormones made. So people that can't get into late 3 or 4 stage sleep, and some people don't. People with sleep apnea don't. They can't get into that. And also...
Oh, so wait a second. So people with sleep apnea...
They cannot get into deep sleep.
They can't get into deep sleep.
No, because as soon as they start doing that, their body relaxes, and the soft palate in the back, it collapses into the space where you're breathing.
What is the cause of sleep apnea? There's a lot of theories. Is it thyroid?
One of them is thyroid problem.
Interesting. Does it have anything to do with altitude? Because I remember I never had it, and I had some slight sleep apnea when I was living in Boulder, Colorado. It was I was living at about 7,200 feet.
Right.
And I don't know if it had anything to do with it, but I never had this before.
I don't know. I don't know that, but it's possible that it was a stress to your system because you were at a high altitude, and anything that's stressful to you can affect, as I said before, earlier, everything affects everything, right? Okay. So.
Now we're going to talk with Dr. Shooter some more about thyroid function during the perinatal period. Now, Dr. Shooter, this is fascinating what you were talking about just before, about all the different functions and signs and symptoms that people have that are quite common in our society. It looks like a lot of people have these kinds of symptoms. Can you say that some of this is thyroid insufficiency in some level, either slight or medium or severe, right?
Yes.
At some level, right?
Absolutely.
And with Fukushima and exposure to so much ionizing radiation,
the radioactive iodine,
the cesium and the uranium and other nucleosides.
The radioactive iodine is a problem even for us here. And if we have receptor sites available, and if all our receptors are not taken with iodine, then the radioactive iodine has a place to land.
I see.
And then we would be more prone, or we would be more open to having thyroid cancer. Not everyone gets it, but then
so the iodine is taking up that seat,
yes.
So somebody can't sit in that seat, right?
Which is why iodine became very scarce after Fukushima.
Right.
It was all bought up because people were, they were hyperdosing with it.
Now, what was that about? There was a controversy. People were getting iodine toxic, they were saying at the time, because they were using too much. But were they using a different form? Is that really true?
Well, I guess too much of anything is not good,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Right.
So I mean, if you're eating, if you're eating pounds of seaweed,
Mm-hmm.
I suppose that wouldn't be so good either. If you drank too much water, water's good for you too.
No, is
8
there
glasses of
incorrect?
water,
Is there?
right?
Yeah, I would.
But if you drank 80 gallons
yeah.
or 8 gallons of water,
Yes.
you could die because you would dilute all your electrolytes.
Well, this is good. This is very practical.
Right.
Like, say for instance, someone says, "Okay, I'm going to go get some iodine," and they go get some betadine, and they drink that every day. Would that be good for them?
Betadine, I guess. They don't, you can't buy iodine over the counter anymore because we used to have iodine that you can put on your skin.
Mm-hmm.
Not anymore because you can make bombs out of it, so they removed it from the market.
That's something I've never heard.
So
Okay.
that's why, gosh,
But
you can't get that.
yeah, I noticed at Target they don't have
No, they
iodine
don't.
anymore.
No, they don't.
Yeah.
They used to have iodine in the
They used to
tincture.
have
in the
35% hydrogen peroxide
In
too.
fact, you can use. They don't have that anymore. But there goes my hair. So if you have, there was a test that we can't really do unless we get iodine.
Right.
But if you paint it on your skin and it disappears, you're deficient because your body was taking it out.
Oh, it's
Right?
absorbing.
This is what they used to do, but now we don't really. You can't go to the drugstore and get iodine.
Right.
And do that
Well, that's in
testing.
all the old pediatric texts. Just use salt and iodine in the bath in case your kids have a flu. Put them in the bathtub, and
Not
it really
anymore.
helps clear up a lot of their
Not
infections.
anymore. No.
Yeah, you have to special order it.
You can. Right?
Yeah, but
You
but it's not all on the over the counter. It's just out there anymore.
There's a doctor. He called it SSKI, I believe. It was like iodine and a couple other things, and he was using it as an antibacterial. Right? So when they traveled, he and his wife, they would use like a tiny amount of that, and it prevented them from getting sick from bacteria, which is very
Right.
interesting.
Yeah.
Right?
Interesting.
I don't know. It's not easy to get. It's hard to do that, but and there's a difference too between seaweed and taking an iodine. And iodized salt, you would think, oh, I take iodine because I eat salt. There's iodine in my salt. There's only it's only one form of it.
Okay.
We need iodine and iodide both.
Got it.
And
So what's the chemical name that's correct? Like, is it potassium iodide you need?
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Potassium would be part of the molecule, right? But you also need iodine in that format, so you need both of them.
You need both of them.
You do.
So, say having lots of seaweed, some
Seaweed would
seafood,
be okay.
like the
Seaweed.
Japanese do.
Seaweed.
Yeah.
Seafood is okay. I have had patients say, I don't eat anything from the sea. I go, oh, that's too bad.
It's kind of polluted these days.
Well, even before.
Right.
They just didn't like fish. They didn't like anything from the ocean.
Right.
I said, well, it's too bad because they would be very depleted in iodine. Very.
Now, when I was younger, they used to say, look, a lot of people have goiters, and even the Department of Agriculture in France, the head of the department there, he wrote a book called André Boisson. He called it Soil, Grass, and Cancer. And he pointed out that the areas of the soil, grass, and cancer. And he pointed out that the areas of France where there was deficient minerals and iodine as well, that people had more incidences of cancer. Back in the 50s, they were studying this. Now, I remember in grammar school, in England and also in the United States, going to school, teachers telling me that in areas where people had deficient access to iodine in their diet, that they had these goiters and they had problems with all kinds of other health problems. But I don't hear them teaching this anymore. Doctors don't talk much about this.
It's unfortunate. It seems that we have to reinvent medicine every 50 years or so. Because the studies that had been done that were actually quite good, people took heed and they did well. Somehow we've forgotten it. It's gone, right?
Well, like if you go to an OBGYN doctor, say you're a woman, you're pregnant.
I am a woman.
Yeah, exactly. You'd have to imagine. And you say, okay, I'm pregnant. What do I do, doctor? I mean, don't they tell you like, hey, you should have some iodine?
No.
These kind of simple things like
They
this?
say don't take any medications, right? Take your prenatals. That's pretty much it. Good luck. I'll see you in 3 months or whatever it is. Yeah.
And what form of iodine is in a prenatal vitamin?
I don't know. I don't even know if it has iodine. I don't think it does, from what I understand.
Got it.
It has a lot of vitamins and it's helpful. It has folate in it, which is very nice.
Right, yeah.
But
Well, our friend Donna Gatesers, she would say, eat lots of seaweed salads.
it'd be a good idea.
That's a
Not
good idea.
everyone likes it, though.
Not everyone.
So,
The Westerners, they don't like seaweed
I don't
that
think
much.
I don't think I would like it.
But there's forms that are kind of great tasting, you know?
You can get the dried seaweed, and then you can flake it or powder it, like kind of rub it together with your hands and put it on your salad. You probably wouldn't taste it, but you'd still get iodine.
Have you ever tried that like hijiki or kombu with like little miso paste, and it's kind of it's delicious. I think
I've become very Americanized.
And the macrobiotic kind of cooking.
Can you get it at McDonald's now?
Exactly.
It's No, I like sushi. Or I did until I look at it now. I go, ooh, it's radioactive, or it has mercury. I don't think I really wanted it that much. I used to like it a lot, but I don't now.
Well, you're from Eastern Europe. I mean, I've lived there too, and it's like the people there are like strong as oxes. I mean, they don't have these problems. And you would think, like, in that area, they would be deficient in iodine. They're not next to oceans and so forth. Yeah. What is it about these people? Well, they're strong people. You don't ever see fat people there. No. You don't see people with, rarely do you see autism. Mm-hmm. When I was living there, now you're starting to, because starting to eat at McDonald's now. Well, yeah. And but why is it they're so healthy there?
Well, you're thinking back in time, right? It may be different now.
Yeah, because they're starting to eat our diet.
Well, they're eating our diet.
The same with Polynesians.
They're also affected by the same toxins. The toxins didn't just stick around the United States.
Right.
It's airborne, and it kind of goes everywhere. Mm. So they're getting toxins as well. Mm-hmm. It's the toxins that are creating more of a problem.
Got it.
But there were a lot of people. WHO had started putting some iodine in salt. Right? Unfortunately, salt is not so good for you. Sea salt. Sea salt is good. The way they make salt is they take it, they dry it out, and they remove the minerals, and then they sell those separately. Then they put bleach into the salt to make it nice and white, and they throw a bit of iodine in it, and that's your salt.
Right.
Yeah, even
which is just sodium chloride.
It's terrible. Right?
Crystallized.
Well, it also has kind of a certain type of bleach in there too. And I don't like that. Right? And once I started using sea salt, I don't even like the taste of regular salt. The taste different. Right? And sea salt may not have much iodine in it, so the iodine has to be brought in elsewhere. Right?
I see. Now, a lot of OBGYN doctors are starting to use iodine as a treatment directly on the cervix for cervical dysplasia. Have you heard of that treatment?
Well, no, but I have heard that for women that had fibroids. In the old days, they used to take some iodine and swab it on the inside of the vaginal walls, and the fibroids would disappear.
Interesting.
And there also, if they had cysts, it was useful for that as well. There's a lot of things it does. If you have adequate iodine, there are fewer cases of breast cancer, and for the men, prostate cancer, fewer cases. Right. So it seems to be preventative for them.
Interesting.
And maybe that's why we're having so many cases of prostate cancer and breast cancer. Right? If you look at the Japanese, before Fukushima, I guess, you look along the coast. Along the coast, they would have more iodine in their soil. And the cases of breast and prostate cancer were very low. If you go inland, there's less iodine. And the cases of breast and it was still lower than we are here, but it was higher than it was on the coast.
That makes sense. Right.
And then the people that came here, people would say, "Oh, well, yeah, it's their genetics." Right? No, because when the Japanese would come to the United States, they had the same rates as we do.
Got it.
Right. So it was less genetic.
Right. Well, let's go back to the brain matrix, the pineal, the GHRH, hypothalamic hormones, and then the pituitary axis there.
The pineal actually makes melatonin, and it also makes DMT, dimethyltryptamine. And we make the most of that when we are born, when we die. And it's interesting to me that it's not legal. So I guess it's not legal to be born or die because you're making a lot of it then. But
unless you're a native born person in the Amazon.
Right. Well, in the Amazon it's okay. Right? Or you have a shaman and you do a ceremony with it. You use ayahuasca, which makes you throw up. It's not something I would like to do. But I'm going to bring up, and this kind of brings to mind morning sickness, and it's the lack of adequate thyroid that causes that.
Interesting. I find that too.
And women, it's been shown.
Yeah. And
women that have hyperemesis gravidum, which is they throw up all the time throughout the pregnancy. Unfortunately, my daughter had that. Usually it's from low thyroid.
Interesting.
And I knew she had that. Later on I knew. I didn't know when she was younger.
Do you find there's a adrenal insufficiency there often there too?
For her there was. I don't know for sure if it runs the gamut in everyone, but it's possible. They do seem to go together. But if you have kids that are very flexible, or even as young adults, they're. I used to think it was double jointed, right? I thought it was a good thing. Apparently not. Right? It's just lacks ligaments, and that's from low thyroid. From youth, right? And also, when kids have it, they have a flattened bridge of the nose. The bridge is flattened.
When they have
low thyroid.
Low thyroid.
You can see that,
I didn't know that.
Right.
Interesting.
So if you see adults with that, it may not be bad enough that they became retarded, but perhaps they didn't really meet all the things they could have been, right?
And what's this a sign of, like insufficient development
Thyroid.
in the womb?
No, low thyroid, even as a baby.
Because of the thyroid
Yeah,
function,
it's low thyroid as a child. Yeah.
Now let's go back to growth hormone.
Right.
Like if you get a lot of sunlight,
Right.
I remember my mother once saying to me, I don't know what it is. We were talking at the dare tale with my dad there, and she said, I don't know what it is. When I go in the sunlight, my sex drive goes up.
Right.
And it was kind of funny to my dad. But he, and I didn't know because I was kind of young. I didn't know what that meant. But people are taking vitamin D supplements. Can a pill replace sunlight?
No, the sun does many other things. It works on the skin to produce vitamin D, and the vitamin D they believe is actually a hormone rather than a vitamin,
that
right?
makes more sense. Yeah.
And so the skin produces it, with the effect of the sun, between the hours of 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. with 40% of your body exposed. And the lack of vitamin D is really low. You can have dementia, or even psychosis. I've seen that. To me, it's a surprise. Right? Wow, look at that.
Right.
And with this woman, she was an older woman, and I asked my friend, did she go out in the sun? Because she seemed to have a problem with calcium, and they thought maybe it was she had cancer of the parent. No, it wasn't cancer. She had been out in the sun a lot. She was fine. She suddenly started developing osteoporosis. Well, what happened is that the lack of vitamin D, she was leaching calcium from her bones, and it was going into the blood. She needed it. And she became somewhat demented. She wasn't like that before. And so I told her, my friend, it was her mother. I said, stop off on the way, because they were driving cross country, and her mother was kind of not well. I mean, she was nervous. She had never been that way. She had 10 kids. How do you be nervous with 10 kids, right? So she wasn't. Last kid was born, she said, pushed him down. You'll walk soon enough, she said. So before, like, oh, God, you're walking. With 10 kids, it would be different. But she was not a nervous person.
Right.
I had her stop along the way and pick up some vitamin D, like high dose.
Right.
And when she took that, she was fine. It went away.
In these Nordic countries, you see there's very high depression rates, right?
Well, yeah. Well, it's this lack of sun. Not necessarily vitamin D. Vitamin D, I don't know if it's...
They drink a lot up there, too.
Yeah,
those Nordic climates. Yeah.
Well, if you think about what the other thing that sun does, sun also, through the eyes, not the skin, it increases your cortisol. So, and without adequate sun, you can have less cortisol. What else increases cortisol is coffee. And alcohol can, and people that are predisposed. Where was coffee, like perfected, was in Seattle. Not very much sun there.
Right.
So it's not surprising. Right.
Oh, that makes sense. Interesting.
Does
Gives
that.
you a whole new perspective on that coffee trend, huh?
And coffee does do that. Caffeine does that.
Now, talking about like depression and suicide rates, one of the things that was a big trend was that these dermatologists who believe their own propaganda about sunlight causing cancer, which is partially true, but not entirely true, is that that it was attributed to their low exposure to sunlight because they actually were not getting any sun. Is it what do you think about this? Do we need, how much sunlight should we get per week? I mean, so Dr. Shooter, there's a lot of controversy around, should we be in the sunlight every day? Should we just go once a week? Should we just have 15 minutes a day? What do you think is adequate sunlight per week?
Let me answer your question with a question. What would be the adequate amount of going to the bathroom a week?
Oh, good point.
Okay,
Yeah.
so this is something you probably need to do every day. And the people that live I live in the Northeast, even though I was born in Hungary, but I lived near New York most of my life, and we don't have sun all year round. And there's more depression there.
Mm.
I treated depression when I was in New York with the with full spectrum lights.
Mm.
So I would have patients, in answer to your question, I would have patients use it for 30 minutes once a day, preferably in the morning.
Mm.
And they would sleep better at night. So you mentioned about sleep and growth hormone. Everything's connected. If you go out in the sun and you're going to make more cortisol, it'll make you feel better. That'll improve. Sex is multi-factorial in terms of hormones. Like a lot of things are involved in that. I don't know that sunshine actually increases testosterone per se, but cortisol is a big part of that.
Now I notice when I go in the sun, or if I do like yoga in the sun, that I may have a great nap after that.
Feel good. Right.
Is there something
Yes.
the connection? Am I getting a little growth hormone boost in the afternoon?
Actually, what you're getting is that we are sun creatures, so we have like a diurnal variation, right? So if you go out in the sun, it turns things on. It's it's your biorhythms, right? You can call it that. So when that's on, you'll sleep better, and it will improve because cortisol goes
Makes
up,
sense.
and then at night you don't need it as much. You're going to have more melatonin. You'll feel better. You'll sleep better. You know, melatonin is one of the strongest antioxidants.
Really?
Yes.
Yeah.
So you I want to take. No, you could take it. It's fine. I don't know during the pregnancy period. I think at that point you might make enough of it, right?
Wonderful.
Right.
Okay. So now we're going to talk to Dr. Shooter about the importance of mercury and what kind of role it can play as an endocrine disruptor. Now, Dr. Shooter, we were talking earlier about this. This is very interesting, what you were saying.
You know, mercury, it disrupts all endocrine systems, but the one that, in particular, that, being that we're talking about thyroid, it interferes with conversion of T4 to T3. I'm going to use my hands for describing it. T4 means that there's 4 iodines stuck to the basic molecule. And there's a deiodinase that comes along. This is a prohormone. It's not very active. 80% of your thyroid hormone that circulates in your blood is T4. Then it gets to where it's going, and then it's going to be activated. Right? And so it's a little bit active, not very. T3 is the hormone. So what happens is something comes along, and it's an enzyme. It snips off an iodine. It's a deiodinase. It snips it off. Now you have T3. The way I describe it to patients is I say it's kind of like a lock and key. No, that's not the real mechanism, but it describes it. So it's only a little bit active, snip off an iodine, and then it engages, and then it's active. So just as a way of visualizing, you can't convert T4 to T3 readily if you have mercury toxicity. So that interferes with activating your thyroid. So you can have plenty of T4. Unfortunately, a lot of doctors, I can't really blame doctors, They usually have very limited amount of time. Usually about 6.7 to 10 minutes is a visit. Somewhere between 6.7 minutes and 10 minutes. That's international. Not a lot of time. You can barely say hello in that amount of time. And they don't really do physical exams so much. They go based on a lab. Unfortunately for thyroid, the lab is T4, and now some of them are doing free T4 that's a little bit better. Free meaning it's the component that's not attached to a protein. When something's attached to a protein, it's no longer active. It's ready to be thrown out.
Now, how does that thyroid insufficiency determine like insufficient stomach acids or interfere with that?
It's one of the things that, thyroid does so many things. And one of the things it does is that it keeps the proper amount of acid in the stomach.
Interesting.
The right pH for the stomach. The pH for the stomach is able to handle a pH of 1.5. That's a very highly acid environment.
Very, wow.
But you need that.
Yeah.
And if you don't have that, it's going to be hard to digest your proteins. So you're not going to be able to break them down readily to amino acids. And so a lot of people that have this may not feel like eating meat.
That's interesting because a big problem today is people with parasites, both microbial kinds of parasites and the worm kind of parasites. And aren't you more prone to have parasitical infections or parasitical microbial infections if you don't have the right pH in your stomach? Right?
It may very well be, right. I mean, there's other big problems with it too, though. you're not going to be able to absorb B12. So you can have worms, you can have all those things, right? B12.
Right.
B12 has to be brought into the body because the digestive tract is not inside the body actually.
It's a fairly large molecule. It's 1,700 molecular weight,
It's
and
a carrier.
usually that's why they say you have to inject it. So,
Right.
but it's a hard enough molecule to absorb without that stomach pH being there,
Well,
right?
you need the pH, and you also have another thing with it is intrinsic factor. Intrinsic factor is the protein carrier, but it needs to have a high acid environment in order to do that. And it's actually it's actually brought in through the duodenum, but the acid has to be there for it to do that.
Now that's also very much part of this whole MTHFR gene and enzyme expression, this epigenetic expression and function in the body. Now B12 is a very important part, relationship with folinic acid and other other cofactors in the B vitamin family as well.
Well, first you have to get the B12 in you in order to have it,
Right.
turn into something
To
that you
absorb
can
it,
use,
yeah.
right? But you have to get it in your body, and if you can't get it in your body, so I do a very simple test for B12. It's called a Romberg test, and you stand there. I have people standing with their feet together, straight up, looking straight ahead with their eyes open. They're in good balance. They close their eyes and they start going, whoa, and they start wobbling.
Interesting.
And if it's really bad, then they'll fall backwards.
I didn't know that was a test for
Yes,
B12.
and then that's low B12.
Wow.
Great party trick too. Right.
That's also one of the classic Ward Dean, Dr. Dillman from Romania. In their old anti-age.
This is a long,
aging
old way of doing it. Right?
Yeah, it was like a aging measurement. It was a
Measurement.
biological age measurement.
And if you don't have B12, you're going to not age very well. B12 is very useful in healing. Now, I'm not exactly sure the mechanism. I just know it is because I'm a geek and I like machines. So I have a very old machine called Diapulse. And Diapulse speeds healing. After an operation, I took it home and I used it. You're supposed to only use it for an hour and then wait 4 hours. Well, I had it at home and I overdosed on it. Sorry to say. Not IV, but I overdosed.
God.
And I used it continually. And then I stood up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom and it was dark. And I started falling into the wall. I could not stand up. And my B12 is low. Because in the dark, you have to use the pathway that is, that you need B12 for. And
Now,
apparently I used it up.
Well, as a psychiatrist, a holistic psychiatrist,
Well, okay.
well, you don't relate it in traditional
Oh,
sense.
no,
anyway.
not anymore.
But B12, isn't that a very important part of mental stability and mental function?
It is. So very, very low B12 if it goes, like if I measure it in the blood. Now, sometimes people will have high B12 in the blood, but it's not adequate. It has to go into the tissue, right? So if it's in the blood, it's in the blood. It's okay. It's better in the blood than having nothing in the blood, right? Then it probably won't get into the tissue, right? But B12 has a very strong effect on depression. So the lack of adequate B12 can make people feel depressed. I have one patient. She's my only schizophrenic patient. Right? She's been with me for a little while. And I tested her, and her B12 was in the double digits. Now, I get worried when people have 400, just in their blood, because they're already having, starting to have symptoms.
Right.
If the blood, if that one measure means anything, then you can. You're constantly using it. But she had double digits. She didn't feel well. And she had gotten more psychotic. So I gave her more B12. It seemed to help her.
Well, back in the 30s and 40s, there were certain doctors that were hypothesizing that people were deficient in B12.
Right, and I think they were right.
And the Nobel laureate, Alexis Carrel, he would go into mental institutions and clean out their nasal sinuses with hydrogen peroxide wash, and water, diluting it down, of course, a lot. But he found as much as 25 to 30% improvement in their conditions sometimes.
Which tells me that a psychiatric presentation is like a final, it's sort of like the end organ, if you will, right? So there's many ways that a person can have something that was defined as a psychiatric disorder. It makes them not as functional emotionally and even, not being able to kind of sit around with the rest of us because they're seeing things they're kind of not quite here or hearing things. Usually schizophrenics hear things, they don't see things. If someone's seeing something, it's a metabolic problem. And that's something psychiatrists should know, right?
Interesting.
All doctors should know that.
A lot of times you want to ask these questions that can, like nutritional questions, seeing if someone's deficient in certain vitamins, minerals. Well, cobalt's at the center of the B12 molecule.
Right.
And if you see someone's deficient, that's something you could add as a trace element, supplement, something.
Well, if they're deficient in B12,
Mm-hmm.
rather than add the cobalt, I'd probably add B12. Right?
Yeah.
I'm not
Got
as
it.
comfortable with cobalt, but
Yeah.
and I don't know that they're going to be able to utilize the cobalt to make B12.
Right.
Right. So I would use probably just B12, and
Got it.
I give B12 shots
Mm-hmm.
because that's not going to get into them otherwise.
Then you're sure there's absorption.
And then I know
Yes.
they're getting it.
Got it.
So they say even they subcutaneously, like under the skin, you can do
Right.
it too. I kind of like to hit the muscle
Mhm.
because I think they're just going to get it for sure. And I use
Right.
methylcobalamin because it sticks around longer.
Methylcobalamin.
Right.
uh-huh.
It's,
Yes.
and this the methylation thing is not as big of a
Right.
problem. Right.
Yeah. Very important.
So-
Yeah. Great.
Right. And I also use methylfolate in my office for patients.
Mm.
So if that's an issue, that's what I use. Right.
Very bioavailable form.
I will use whatever I will adjust it to what they need.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times doctors will have certain things that they do.
Mm-hmm.
If you have one of the 5 things they know about, then
Mhm.
you get treated. If not, then you get sent to the psychiatrist.
Well, that's an important question. I mean, like a lot of times people are diagnosed with a certain condition or syndrome or, and so forth. And don't you want to look at these foundational issues before you start doing these radical procedures on them? Or
Like lobotomy.
Yeah.
Right,
That's really
very
radical,
sad,
yeah.
very sad.
Yeah.
No, unfortunately, I don't believe in psychiatric disorders.
Mhm.
I believe that people have symptoms.
Mm.
They do. So it's not like I'm being disrespectful to people and say we
Right.
don't have anything. They do. They have symptoms, and they're hurt, they're this, and then they have all kinds of things. But it's not necessarily something called a psychiatric disorder. In fact, he's the director of NIMH, National Institute of Mental Health, the government arm of research for psychiatry,
Right.
subset of NIH. And Thomas Insel is his name. Very brave and brilliant. Right?
Mm-hmm.
He came out with a blog on the eve of the latest big book of psychiatry, DSM, Diagnostic and Statistical Manual.
Right.
And he said, no, it's very nice. He said, it's consistent from psychiatrist to psychiatrist, but it has no validity.
Yeah.
None of the diagnoses have any validity.
Well, that's a great point you're bringing up, because a lot of the faculty at the Brighton Institute, what they're saying is look, let's switch it from these abstract concepts of conditions, although there's validity to some of the physiology, to an existence conversation, like to looking at what they're actually experiencing. Like, for instance, asking the question like, what is a mental problem? What is a mental condition even?
That's what
Like,
everyone else has,
and
not
what
me.
is a normal one? Like, it's like,
Right.
I mean, what is a normal mental condition? Because, and what are the signs of it? It's like, when I see people like in their native environment, say, if you ever met people like in Polynesia or in different native environments, you see people just not trying to impress people, but just in their natural state, where they're living in nature. They
They're
seem
comfortable.
pretty comfortable. They're comfortable inside their skin. They're showing compassion to the people around them. They love their children. They're very simple life.
Not always, I guess.
But then we could go there and diagnose them and say, they're paranoid, they're throwing arrows at people.
Some of them are.
Yeah,
Right.
some of them are.
So, but we think our behavior is it's just who we are, but who we are is also a lot of stuff that we do is unconscious. We have automatic behaviors, and we think that that's who we are, but it's not. And we are being pushed around by our biology, which then is also being pushed around by our toxins and our hormones and everything else. Then we always seem to forget about the power of intent, because then you can make a decision about being a certain way, and then you can be that. You can meditate. And actually meditation seems to be the great healer. Especially not just mindfulness.
To get you out of that reactive biochemistry and emotional
it
things.
actually raises your cortisol. So if you have too much cortisol, meditation it'll normalize. So there was a study done with transcendental meditation, and they found that people at high levels, they brought them down to normal, and that people at low levels, it brought them up to normal.
Interesting. So it's a
Balance.
modulator of.
Exactly.
They found the same thing with growth hormone, that it raises your growth hormone as well. Naturally.
It is good for everything.
Adrenal
right? It's good
function.
for everything. Right.
And why do you
I've
think
never
that
heard it
is?
was bad, right?
And some of that, I remember at the Kundalini Research Institute in Pomona, we used to study this, and some of the researchers were at MIT at the time, and they said studying meditation, they find that one of the reasons why people have more balanced hormones when they use it is that they're using their whole brain.
That's one way to look at it. I think it's because they're disconnecting their brain. They're disconnecting their thoughts. They're allowing stillness. And then everything is not really from us, it's through us, right? That's a point I want to make, that, when I had my own children many, many years ago,
Wow.
I'm rather much older, right? So, but it was, our kids were from us. No, they aren't really. And a friend of mine told me that. I thought that was brilliant. Our children come through us. They are not from us.
That's a beautiful way of looking at that.
So
they have their own destiny.
having that perception, it validates the kids for who they are, as opposed to they are you. No, they aren't. Identical twins are very different, even if they have identical genes and identical everything.
What's kind of relieving is sometimes you think about, we don't have to be just like our ancestors. We can actually reinvent ourselves. That's kind of relief.
I did. I reinvented myself.
Because most cultures were pretty crazy.
Well, I became a doctor late.
Yeah.
I went to medical school at 36.
Yeah.
So, and people said, "What did you do before?" I was a housewife.
That's amazing. Yeah. But that you
I
had that willpower,
drive,
to do.
terrible drive. Right?
That's great. Wonderful.
Stubbornness. Well, I like to think of it as stick-to-itiveness, right?
Cool. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
Now we're going to talk with Dr. Suzie Shooter about oxytocin. Oxytocin has been called the love hormone, the bonding hormone, the relationship hormone. Now there's all this talk around, bonding and breastfeeding, but for the men out there who can relate to it, it's what you feel when you have a prostate contraction or an orgasm. It's the same kind of blissful feeling when you're mating and you're making love to your woman. And so it's one of those things that we find, though, is becoming in short supply. Like, for instance, we know that when oxytocin levels are lower in women, that they tend to have more C-section rate.
Also, I tend to have anorgasmia too.
Anorgasmia, interesting, yeah. And so with the I remember my great grandmother saying that her doctor told her that modern women don't breastfeed, quote unquote. Right. And so that was like already popular, like back in 1910, 1900s, right? And so this has been going on a long time, this trend towards lower oxytocin, less bonding, with the formulas then coming into the picture, more cesareans being done. These are adding to the damaged oxytocin function. Even epidurals are suppressing oxytocin
Experiencing
function.
the contraction.
And then on top of it, then if the child's in the ICU afterwards, it's separated, physical separation. So a lot of children are being born this way, and then can we then blame them for having behavioral problems because they have a deficient oxytocin, which means they have less empathy for this. Now, I remember back in the early 90s that it was a big issue on the news. They were saying this. They finally saw some guy just shot someone at an ATM because they were just for $20, and they said, this has never happened before. And then I heard some oxytocin researchers, some doctors saying, well, people have impaired oxytocin, and this is what we're getting. We're getting high lead levels, low oxytocin levels. Can we blame our children today for having behavioral problems when we're birthing them in this kind of extreme way without bonding?
It's a clinical environment.
Yeah.
Rather than a loving environment. And people that choose to have home births will have kids that they're more bonded to. So I think it's really a much better way of doing it, unless there's a problem. In which case then you need kind of an emergency measure, right? So people that have midwives, midwives are more open to that. Doctors tend to, and I don't know if now, but for a while they wanted things clinically, right? And I remember breastfeeding my first child many years ago, and I lost the milk because my father died. And I had no idea that would happen.
Oh, wow.
Right?
Yeah.
Like, wow, I just didn't make any more. And then when I gave birth to the second one, I mentioned to the doctor, he didn't have any idea, but I mentioned to him that I felt this tingling. It was kind of weird. It was milk letting down, but I didn't know that, and neither did he. That was the sad thing. He said, well, maybe you better stop, so I did. That's probably why she's having problems. I don't know. But there is a bonding. I have a friend who did something lovely. It was a man, and his wife died, and he had this baby to take care of. and he had gotten this thing to wear with that would feed the baby, that he could hold the baby, and that gave him like a sense of bonding. And the baby, and the nipple was there. He kind of, and his friends made fun of him, but he didn't care. Right? It was very lovely. You know? He felt very close to the child. The child had some bonding that way. It was very nice. Good kid.
What can we do, like, say, somebody who was born with these circumstances, you know, with a cesarean section, weren't breastfed, formula fed, and they have deficient oxytocin function? What can they do to proliferate their bonding and ability to have better relationships and love in their life?
Well, I think touch, you know, skin to skin contact, right? Skin in with a child, skin to skin contact is very important. I remember there was a study, well, not really a study, it was a picture I had seen. It was in a psychiatric book where they had rows and rows. It was an orphanage at the end of World War I, with all these babies that were just orphans, and they were in very neat rows. It was in Germany, very neat rows, and the babies, you could see they were fed. They had their bottles propped up, and no one really touched them. They would get cleaned. They would change their diapers, prop up their bottles, they got fed on time, and they started to die. Because there was no skin-to-skin contact.
And that was already in World War I? You're right. That's a
and
long
they started
time.
to die. I was like, what happened? I mean, what did we do? I mean, we fed them, we took care of them, we cleaned them, everything was cool.
The mechanization
they need the skin-to-skin contact.
Interesting.
They need to feel wanted.
Yes.
You know, like just what the feeling is. Is it oxytocin? Possibly. But they didn't really know that. They just knew, and they called it failure to thrive.
Right.
People would die from that. Kids would die. Babies. It was sad, right?
We also know, today we know that there's a lot of probiotics that come from the mother's milk.
Yes.
And then on the other hand, though,
cholesterol, right?
some mother's milk is so toxic with pesticides, they're actually making their baby sick by breastfeeding. So we're kind of in a dilemma today.
Well,
you know?
not really. If you should be tested and see if you have pesticides before you decide to breastfeed, right? I mean, so there are ways of countering that, or to know what's going on. I would not, when you try to detox someone, even if they had mercury, whatever they have, I don't think that while they're pregnant is a great time to pull things out of the tissue.
Yes, at the Brighton Institute we say so important.
Leave it
preconception period. That's why so much has
and
to be
you
done.
don't do it while because then you're making them more toxic.
That's
because
the
it's in the
baby's
blood,
brain's a dump
It's
site
there,
for the
right,
toxic
right.
metals, right?
So you want to leave it in the tissue, even though it's not great there, but it's better there.
Right.
So I don't recommend that. But if you can plan, you have time to plan. That's very smart.
Right.
Rather than whoops, I'm pregnant now, right?
Right.
It's more like, okay, let's see what can I do to make to give my child the best chance possible, right? And it's not the genetics; it's what we're doing ahead of time, right? So if you're driving through the McDonald's window, right? Not that I have anything against McDonald's, but it's not considered organic, the best food ever, right? It's cheap, right?
Right.
So if kid doesn't have money to eat, okay, go for it, right? But if you want to really have the best chance for your child, then you have to eat well. You have to check to see if you do have toxins, because you may have picked up things from your childhood that you never got rid of. And one patient, she had lived in New Jersey for a while, and she had a high cadmium level because they had cadmium in the soil. And
while we're talking about love,
yes,
love making and the hormones, let's talk a little bit about birth control pills, because this is a very common thing. As you know, so many women take.
That's my soapbox.
Now,
right?
when a woman takes birth control pills, we can just read the list of side effects. They're there. It's estrogenic. It congest the liver.
I personally think
there are a lot of things that are a problem there. And they, what do you think about most doctors say 6 months. At least between when you stop taking birth control pills to the time you conceive.
Don't even take them for 6 hours, I think, to begin with. I mean, the idea that you're going to take something to regulate your periods is nonsense.
That's very common. Can't tell you how many women I've seen that said, the doctor put me on these birth control pills when I was 12.
To regulate my period. I think it's terrible. First of all, when women have very heavy periods, right, even when they're young, that's usually a thyroid problem that causes menorrhagia. That's not a good thing.
Right.
It can be from other things, but it could be a thyroid problem. They're not looking for the underlying problem. They're just trying to do a quick fix. Right?
I see.
So if you're having a leak somewhere, you're going to stick a cork in it and just pray, hope for the best, right? And then they say, well, if a person got pregnant, and the pregnant is more dangerous than the birth control pill. I disagree. And I have a very unusual, I guess, I'm kind of giving it some thought, but I think the birth control pill is responsible for the high divorce rate.
Really? Why? Interesting.
And it's just a theory I have. I don't think it's because now women feel freer to fool around. I don't think that's it at all. I think it's that what happens is that because you're taking birth control pills, it increases a binding protein called SHBG. And now your testosterone is being bound up. And you have less testosterone, so you're less interested in sex.
Interesting.
And men connect through sex. They feel wanted through sex. And part of that may be because of oxytocin with orgasm, and they cuddle, right? And I think there's also a never let him see a sweat concept, that it's okay with sex, that you can cuddle and do things, right? But then the oxytocin will probably have a big effect too. So the women don't want to have sex, they must not love me. The woman does it, she must not love me, right?
Right.
And then women think, well, I must not really love him anymore because I'm not really feeling very interested in sex with him.
Yeah, I've seen this before. I've seen this where a couple came to me one time. It was about 15 years ago, and they were ready. They were fighting, and they were ready to commit suicide. They both said, "I'm ready to commit suicide. Please help me." And I tested her hormones, and she had no testosterone.
Oh.
And
did you look at free testosterone?
And when we brought it up, she said it was like a completely different relationship. So it's what you're saying is interesting. Is that what you find?
I see it all the time. But I'll tell you.
And I never thought that was so important until that period.
Very big, very big. And so let me tell you why. Then women will look elsewhere, and because it's a new relationship, they will make adrenaline. And adrenaline's exciting. It's like, oh, okay, so this is something new. When the person that they're with, they're kind of used to that, they don't have, so they'll make a bit more testosterone with a new person.
Right, I see.
And they think, oh, I must be in love with that person. Well, not really. So they're having a false sense of what being in love is because of their hormones, right?
Right, yeah.
And it's not just testosterone that lowers, but I see a lot of problems with cortisol. And thyroid as well. It's because all the binding proteins of all your hormones increase. In particular, the testosterone is the greatest one, more frequent and more of a big impact. But low cortisol, I see, they even had on labs, like I look at the binding protein, and normal would be, let's say, we're going to make this up, like 10 to 30, right? And they would have 100. And then one lab, they stopped doing it, but they said, well, in women on the pill, it'll be like something to 100, and they give it a higher number. Well, and that's the range. But the range is an average. It's not normal.
Well, adrenal function is a big part of our sex drive, too.
Right.
What about DHEA levels? I mean,
It all has an effect.
What do you think about how to strengthen your adrenal function in that way?
Well, sunshine, protein.
Sunshine with DHEA? Yeah.
Right. Well,
through the growth hormone?
Your adrenal function will increase, right? Well, actually, if you want to go a different way, you'd say, heroin would do that too, right? But it's not really the best way to go. Right?
Why is it so addictive, by the way?
Not for everyone. It's not, just like alcohol is not addictive for everyone. Some people have a drink and, and other people get mujo and then they get stuck to it. Yeah. Not everyone does, right? And they can take it or leave it, right? Opiates, also, people, not everyone's going to like it. Not everyone's going to be enamored of it. Not everyone is going to be addicted to it. They'll take for pain and they're kind of done. They don't want to take it anymore.
Right.
So it varies. And I think there's a genetic predisposition as to what will work. So what happens is that whatever it is that you like will attach to the mu receptors in the hypothalamus, which then increases something called CRH, which is corticotropin release. I always sound smart when I say it. Corticotropin releasing hormone, which then goes to the pituitary, and then you release more of the hormone that stimulates the adrenal glands, and so you can make more cortisol. Now they don't really. I think cortisol is that's not the reason they do it. You're doing it because of the endorphin. Because when you're increasing ACTH, which is the hormone that stimulates the adrenal gland, you're also increasing beta endorphin, and that's the feel-good one. It's all on the same molecule.
Now, when people are depressed, what hormones are most usually suppressed? Is
Thyroid.
Thyroid?
Thyroid cortisol. Cortisol is more of a stealth one because nobody looks at them. It's only stealth because nobody's looking, right? Except me. Well, a few other people too. But it's a huge player. But thyroid is also very important. They're all important. Growth hormone too. Low growth hormone will make someone depressed.
Now, postpartum
Right.
depression is a very common thing. I call it postpartum deficiency syndrome because what I
you're
find
right.
is they're very deficient.
I think you're right.
And if they, because my patients just rarely ever have that, and if they do, it's very slight. And it's because of the work we do preconception.
Right.
Now, what do you think about that? I mean, do you find that if women have normal endocrine function and mineral function and probiotics, do they have much postpartum depression?
There's also women that have bonding with their baby.
Mm.
You know, sometimes there's a bonding issue.
Right.
So if they're, the baby's whisked away, or
With the C-section, that's interfered with,
even
right?
with a C-section, there could be other reasons for a C-section besides low oxytocin. You can have like a small, opening. You don't have enough progesterone. You may not be able to, do all that. But so it's also a, but to take the baby, even with a C-section, don't they can be put into a light anesthesia. It doesn't have to be a very heavy anesthesia.
Yeah.
And then the baby can be put on them anyway.
Right.
And so that makes it, they can bond with the baby.
But this is a factor that no one ever talks about, and that's when you're using anesthesia, one, it almost always suppresses lung function.
Well, it suppresses everything.
And then it suppresses especially your liver, because it's filtering out.
Well, it interferes.
And that has a lot to do with the depression, the liver, and especially in Chinese medicine.
Okay, that's a whole different way of looking at it.
Yeah.
It's a different paradigm.
Yeah.
Not it's just different, right? Looking at it from a different lens.
Right.
Just as valid, right?
Right.
And I've seen it work.
But in the new book I have coming out, The Recipe for Rapid Recovery, I do with a British chef, where I taught people how to get over surgeries, things like C-section quickly. I address like how to gently remove the anesthesia from your liver quickly after you have it, so that it causes minimal damage. But it's just a dietary thing. It's not it's not it's like cooking and food, but some
important.
of these foods are very powerful.
Very important, right?
And but it's a kind of a friendly gateway to look at this kind of.
Well, I can tell you hormonally, if someone has low cortisol, they don't process drugs or anesthesia or anything that well. And I know a friend, I won't mention names, but when his wife was having surgery, he would see, because they wouldn't want to give her cortisol because, well, that's terrible for you. That's unfortunate, that's their concept, and it's wrong. Usually anesthesiologists are much more aware. But he would give her cortisol, and she was able to process it better and come out of surgery better.
Wonderful.
So,
thank you.
You're very welcome.
We're here with Dr. Suzie Shooter again, talking about oxytocin, and we're going to go into a little bit about the 9 levels of orgasm, tantric yoga, Taoist yoga, and sexology. As we talk about in Bright and Baby, this is a very important part of human relationship and conceiving a baby in love, in happiness, and the ecstasy and bliss of making love and what that's about, because there's so much mechanization of sex, and where there's so much pixelation of sex in the form of porn on the internet, and sometimes we get disconnected with our roots, the bonding between people, and of course we want to conceive and birth children in the highest states of love and happiness and energy, right? So we were talking earlier about what are some of the basic things, like when you in tantric yoga, my masters from India taught me, the basic thing you want to do is just be with somebody. Look like you were talking about, looking in someone's eyes, connecting with them. That's the first stages, and there's no limit to this, is there? I mean, and when you do that and you conceive a baby in that way, what are the effects of that? You're saying that looking in someone's eyes has a powerful effect.
Depends on how you're looking. If it's an enemy and you're doing that. But if you're looking at someone that you love and in a loving way, that does increase cortisol. And not cortisol, it does that too, but it increases oxytocin. So if you're doing, what I see that, as you were mentioning, the tantric and the yoga and all that, it's an organizing way. It's a way of organizing the structure of that, perhaps. But making it simplistic or simple, for simple, people who don't know enough about that, like me, just gazing into someone's eyes that you love, it's powerful. It's also not so easy. Just sort of sitting there and looking and feeling. And in a way, you can kind of think about it as maybe like a compassion type of meditation in a way, because you are really loving that person. and love heals everything.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Well, these tantric yoga masters from India, some of the things that they say, and in the scriptures it says, like when you're doing tantra and you're feeling love and you're communicating love through your eyes, say through mudras, you're holding hands, and in the tantric yoga meditations, the meditations are designed to open up the higher brain chemistry, and they say there's endocrine functions, they call it amrita, which is like nectar of immortality, they claim, that says that you open up this kind of a growth hormone, like pineal gland part of the brain, and that this creates a whole cascade of bliss and happiness and ecstasy, and that it's in that state that you want to conceive a child or a higher being. Is there anything in medicine that talks about this kind of subtle physiology of the higher brain chemistry?
In a simple answer, no. It's not usually discussed as far as I know.
But isn't it there, like in, if you read between the lines around growth hormone, if you look at like this kind of thing, it's
well, growth hormone is made in the posterior pituitary, and it's released. It's possibly the hypothalamus. Oxytocin is actually stored, not the posterior, oxytocin is stored in the posterior pituitary, and growth hormone is made in the anterior pituitary. But oxytocin is actually made in the hypothalamus, and then it's stored in the posterior pituitary to be released. It's one of our hormones. Not everyone is endowed with the same amount of oxytocin, sadly. There are kids that are born that are autistic for whatever reason. And it's been noted by some researchers that they make less oxytocin, a lot less, a lot and less cortisol and a lot of adrenaline. You can kind of see how that combination would cause kids to not be able to cope, right? But in terms of love and sex, and I've given a lecture in Paris, of course, of all places. I gave a lecture on love. Called myself the love doctor in jest, but there's three stages. And stage 1 would be sexual attraction. Stage 2 would be that falling in love, where the loved one, you can't think of anything else other than the loved one. It's not a fun time, actually, because it's either you're in a panic, because it's you don't know, you're feeling anxious, right?
Well, even the label falling in love doesn't sound very good, like you're falling.
No, you're falling. Right. You get injured, right? So, but it is, you're either depressed because you think they don't want you, or you're elated. So it's a highly volatile time. You could probably even call them bipolar, because they go up and down. And
but it seems like there must be some kind of like bioevolutionary purpose behind falling in love.
There is.
Right?
You choose that person, and that keeps you focused in on that person, and no longer anyone else.
But what if you lose? It's like gambling,
then you start again.
You're playing all of your money on one game.
Then you start again, right? You go make some more money, and then you do it again. Right. So, but there's 3 stages. So stage 1, that usually doesn't last long, is hormone based. Stage 2 is more neurotransmitters, oxytocin, all those things, right? But sex hormones are a big part of that as well. Stage 3, if you don't get to stage 3, they say that it can only last about 14 months, because it's much too intense to continue that level of, that heightened intensity, that heightened feeling, like up, down, anxious, and how can you even work it? It's terrible, right? It's an addiction in a way.
Right, yeah.
And
it's kind of like an addiction.
I've given a lecture in a rehab on the addictive nature of love, and they said, well, people say, well, isn't it an addiction? And, can you, love then is an addiction. It's not good.
But where's that like thin line there between like stalking, where it's only one way, and then falling in love? It has to be mutual, but oftentimes it's not in the beginning.
Well,
and then people,
and
then
if it becomes
the
mutual,
other one changes.
Right. Yeah. But if the other person keeps pushing you away, and you keep following the person around, then you get arrested. Right. In California, anyway. So if you have, but anyway, they say that it only lasts about 14 months. The intensity is too great. Right. At the end of 14 months, it will either end, we'll go on to stage 3. Now, stage 3 is that comfortable, happy feeling that you have just being with the person.
Right.
You just be sitting there. You can do your own thing. It doesn't matter. You just feel good in their
Like
presence.
2 doves on a branch.
You're just happy. You're
Right.
happy with them, right?
Right.
So getting to stage 3 is the goal. So if you look at it as a way of keeping children, you know, and you know, because our goal is to pass our genetic material along. It doesn't sound very romantic, but that's the goal, right? I mean, it's that kind of
Nature's
cut and
tricking
dry,
us,
right.
right.
So, so that's what we're supposed to do, and
Right.
then finding the person that is just the right person, and the person that we're attracted to. And actually, we have a certain preconception of what that is, right? Based on our parents, based on our genetics, also. Like men, you know, they have like a certain breast to hip to waist ratio,
Right, yeah.
and a certain ratio would be very attractive.
Right, yeah.
But you know, there's someone for everyone, and other features are also equally enticing.
So now with oxytocin, I mean, this is called the bonding hormone,
Right.
the love hormone.
Right.
But if someone is impaired, what can they do to repair some of that? I mean, I've heard things like hops flower extract helps to induce our own oxytocin. Certainly cuddling, some of the things you
Petting
mentioned
a dog,
before. Petting a dog,
petting
yeah.
a cat, right?
Yeah.
You know, just
Walking in nature, does that help?
yes, it does.
Really? I didn't know that.
It does. Well, it also increases your cortisol.
I know, I feel great when I'm like walking in the forest.
So you can tell.
Yeah.
Because if you, I mean, not that you're walking along getting an orgasm, but you know, you feel good, right? It's a good feeling.
Well, when I was a monk, an integral monk for 10 years, and, you know, I was celibate. And, I mean, the first year I had a rough time. I was only 19, but, you know, but it was, people say, are you crazy? It's the worst time to choose to be a monk. You're doing it backwards. You're supposed to do it at the end of your life, not the
Well,
beginning.
you don't care.
But I didn't care. I was like, I was in love with God. And that's the only thing I could think about.
Oh.
And I didn't miss sex at all. I mean, you know, I was learning how to transmute the energy, and I would go into these really blissful meditations. I mean, what's going on in physiology? Like I've talked to scientists too. There's a new research that shows like that discovery is like this exciting thing to the brain, that it's almost like an addiction greater than sex even. Now, what's going on in our neuroendocrine system?
That's adrenaline.
Is that adrenaline?
Yeah.
Excitement, you know?
It's the excitement. It's the excitement of discovery. So.
Well, I like race car drivers. I used to race cars, and
There you go.
I remember the first time I went, I was like scared to death. I was like, okay, get me out of here.
And then you enjoyed it.
This is like completely creepy.
Nuts.
Get me out of here. I was like completely frightened. By the second or third time around, I was like loving it. It was like the most fun I ever had in my life.
It was adrenaline.
Is that adrenaline? Yeah.
So initially the adrenaline made you nervous. And
So when you fall in love, do you get a lot of
oh,
adrenaline
sure.
too?
Oh,
Yeah.
sure, you do.
I wasn't thinking
And it's
about
interesting, like, if you look at the hormones, there's a graph on that where when men and women fall in love, women's testosterone goes up.
that.
Yeah, assuming they're not taking birth control, but but their testosterone goes up.
Right.
Their cortisol goes up.
Right.
And then in men, their cortisol goes up and their testosterone goes down.
Got it. Okay.
And so you think about the reason for that is to keep them around, to raise the child, right? So the testosterone would go down.
Makes
right?
sense. Yeah.
And they said that, like, if you hand a man a baby, it'll lower his testosterone levels, right? And, and they're not as aggressive. It just takes away
Well,
aggression.
I remember the moment that happened for me. It's like, I remember being shopping in like a Target store, one of those stores in the valley. I was visiting friends, and I was like, being the mom for a day. I was off of work, and I was like gonna do the shopping for the typical mom things, diapers, everything. It was like, and all of a sudden I noticed myself like looking at doing the things that mom does, right? And so I'm like, oh my God, I'm like a mom right now. And I was like, but I enjoyed it. I kind of like looked around to see if anyone was watching. I was like,
that male concept.
And then I saw myself like, okay, look, it's okay. It's like, I'm a dad. I got it. I have to do this.
Sure.
But, I noticed, I remember that moment very distinctly to this day where like, I enjoyed doing this.
Right.
Was that what you're saying? I was like those kinds of, oxytocin was kicking in for me.
Oh yeah. I mean, you love this child.
I was enjoying it though.
You fall in love with your child.
Yeah.
You do. And that in part maybe oxytocin. We may be, looking sadly, and we're trying to turn it into a science.
Right.
And then we're creating, oh, it's this hormone or that hormone. It just could be love, right?
Well, so dads out there, don't worry. You're not going to like turn into a female or,
No.
you know, anything like that. You're not going to grow breasts or anything. It's okay to feel like this way.
You can wear on lipstick or anything like that.
Exactly.
Right. So, I mean, you know,
Right.
we have certain roles that we fulfill in society. And are they real? No, not necessarily. I know a lot of women that are very masculine.
Right.
And they're mothers, and they're not necessarily gay. You know, they're heterosexual, but that's just who they are. Right? Yeah, and it's fine. There are men that are not so masculine. That's okay too. So we have both. We have, you know, the yin and yang. So we have both aspects of us, and sometimes one is a little bit more dominant than the other. Right? And it's okay to be anything you want to be. Right? That's fine. So, and then the hormones will fall into place. You know that testosterone for men is very interesting. There was a study done with 2 crew teams. And the crew teams were, they tested, it was fascinating, they tested their testosterone before the race, they averaged it out, and then they had the race, and they tested it again. The winning team's testosterone went up, and the losing team's testosterone went down on average. So just the feeling of being a winner increases testosterone for men.
Interesting.
Right.
Yeah, that's why men like to watch football games and just get that rush of energy and go to football games.
It makes them feel more. It gets more testosterone. It feels good.
Yeah, I've noticed that. Yeah,
Right.
but then why do we drink beer? Because that isn't that estrogenic and that lowers it, doesn't it?
Well, they're not thinking I'm going to lower my testosterone now. Right? You know, I'm going to just have a really good time, right? You know, what happens is that the alcohol, it interferes with getting rid of the estrogen. So if you drink a lot all the time, it's going to build up. The estrogen will build up. Pot will also do that. Like weed, cannabis, it will interfere with getting rid of the estrogen. So a lot of guys that smoke pot, if they're predisposed, they will grow breasts as well. Right?
Interesting. The THC part or the CBD?
No,
part?
the THC.
The THC part.
Right.
Got it. Okay.
Right. And that causes.
Now, what about men who drink a lot of beer all the time? Why do they get these huge bellies?
Well, they're having.
Does that have to do with the estrogen?
Well, yeah, but it also gives them fat deposition around their organs, which is why it pushes out. It feels hard, but
maybe
it's
the
like,
yeast too, and
it's more like they're. It's not good for you. Basically, right?
Too much.
It creates a problem.
Bloatedness, maybe congested liver
it's also
too.
Sugar,
Yeah. Oh, really? Oh, because alcohol converts into the sugar in the blood. Yeah.
Right. And then also, if you have low thyroid, you can also be bloated.
Right.
So because you're not digesting, you can be bloated not just in the uppers, abdomen, but also in the lower abdomen as well. So it could just be, and it's also the food you eat. Right.
Wow.
It all ties together.
This is very interesting. I can't thank you enough for coming today.
You're welcome. My pleasure.
And being with us.
My pleasure. And I learned a lot too.